Commander Li Jun gripped the metal railing of his ship's bridge as he stared out at the impossible sight before him. The enemy fleet had just appeared from nowhere, tearing holes in space itself as they arrived. These weren't just ships. They were floating cities made of dark metal, each one bigger than anything humans had ever built. There were hundreds of them, maybe thousands, stretching out so far he couldn't see where they ended. The Vorthan Empire had finally found Earth. Li Jun had heard the stories, of course. Every military officer in human space knew about the Vorthans. They were the monsters parents used to scare children, the bogeymen that haunted the nightmares of frontier colonists. For 300 years, they had swept across the galaxy like a plague, conquering every species they encountered. Some fought back and died. Others surrendered and became slaves. None had ever defeated them. "Sir," Lieutenant Park Mina called from her station, her voice tight with fear. "We're getting a transmission from the flagship." Li Jun turned to see Admiral Kim Dae's face appear on the main screen. The old man looked tired. His hair had gone completely grey in the past year, and deep lines creased his weathered face. He had been preparing for this day longer than anyone, studying every scrap of intelligence about the Empire, planning for the moment when humanity would finally face its greatest test. The screen flickered, and suddenly they were looking at something else entirely. The Vorthan ambassador materialized in a shimmer of blue light, and Li Jun felt his stomach lurch. The creature was tall and thin, with pale skin that looked almost translucent. 6 black eyes studied them from its elongated face, while thin arms ended in hands with too many fingers. When it smiled, rows of sharp teeth gleamed in the artificial light. "Greetings, primitive ones," the alien said, its voice carrying the casual arrogance of absolute power. "I am Overlord Thexmat, speaking for His Imperial Majesty and the Great Vorthan Empire. We have come to offer you a choice, though I suspect you already know what it will be." Admiral Kim Dae said nothing, his face a mask of calm determination, but Li Jun could see the tension in the old man's shoulders, the way his hands clenched slightly at his sides. "Your species will submit to Imperial rule," Thexmat continued, clearly enjoying the moment. "You will pay tribute to the Empire, accept our governors on your worlds, and provide soldiers for our armies. In return, we will allow you to continue existing. It is more generous than most species receive." The alien paused, letting the words sink in. Around the bridge, Li Jun could hear the quiet sounds of his crew working, fingers tapping on keyboards, the hum of computers, the soft beeping of monitoring equipment. Normal sounds that somehow felt strange in the face of such an enormous threat. "You have 72 hours to make your decision," Thexmat said. "Submit or face complete extinction. We have destroyed entire species for less defiance than you have already shown. Choose wisely." Kim Dae finally spoke, his voice steady and measured. "We require time to consider your generous offer." The alien laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Of course you do. Fear makes all creatures hesitate. We will return for your answer." The transmission ended, leaving the humans alone with the weight of impossible choice. Around the bridge, nobody moved, nobody spoke. They all understood what they had just witnessed, the end of everything they had ever known. But Admiral Kim Dae was already moving. "Send the Eagle Protocol to all colonies," he ordered quietly. "Authentication code Burning Sky. Make sure every world receives the message." Lieutenant Park Mina's fingers flew over her controls, sending encrypted quantum bursts racing across human space at faster-than-light speeds. Within minutes, the signal reached every human colony, every military base, every ship in the fleet. On the frontier world of New Busan, Colonel Song Yi received the message in her underground command center. She had been expecting it for months, ever since the long-range sensors first detected the approaching Vorthan fleet. Her hands shook slightly as she decoded the transmission, but her voice remained steady as she called her staff together. "Execute Prometheus Protocol," she announced to the room full of officers. "All civilians to evacuation stations immediately. Begin core charging sequence." Captain Oh Min stood on the observation deck of his ship, watching as hundreds of civilian transports launched from the planet below, families fleeing their homes, carrying only what they could grab in the desperate rush to escape. Children pressed their faces against the windows, watching their world shrink behind them, not understanding that they would never see it again. His personal tablet chimed with an incoming message, the final authorization codes he had been dreading. With trembling fingers, he input the sequence that would arm the massive fusion charges buried deep in the planet's core. Charges that had been secretly installed over the past decade, hidden in mining operations and construction projects that the public never questioned. 72 hours, he whispered to himself, staring at the world where he had been born, where his parents were buried, where his children had taken their first steps. Then we show them what humanity chooses. Across 200 human worlds, the same scene played out. Military commanders receiving impossible orders, civilians loading onto ships without knowing why, fusion charges powering up in the depths of planets that had been home to billions of people. The Vorthan Empire had given humanity 3 days to surrender. They had no idea that humans had been preparing for this moment for generations, studying their own history, learning from the times when freedom required the ultimate sacrifice. In 72 hours, the galaxy would learn that some species would rather burn than bow. The 72 hours passed like a countdown to the end of the world. Overlord Thexmat sat in his command throne aboard the massive Vorthan flagship, watching the clock tick down to humanity's surrender. Around him, his officers prepared reception ceremonies and calculated tribute quotas. Another species was about to kneel before the Empire, just like all the others. The alien commander had done this dance hundreds of times before. First came the threats, then the deadline, then the inevitable capitulation. Some species tried to negotiate better terms. Others begged for mercy. A few even attempted last-minute military strikes that were crushed within hours. But they all surrendered in the end. Fear always won. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet." Thexmat smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. Finally, the moment he had been waiting for. He would enjoy watching these primitives grovel for their lives. Perhaps he would even be generous and allow some of their leaders to live as examples to the others. But when Admiral Kim Dae's weathered face appeared on the screen, there was no fear in his eyes. No desperation, no pleading. Instead, the old human looked directly at Thexmat with something the alien had rarely seen: absolute defiance. "You came for our worlds, Overlord," Kim Dae said quietly. "Take them." Before Thexmat could respond, the transmission cut out. For a moment, the Vorthan bridge was silent. Then the sensor alarms began screaming. 200 stars blazed to life across human space in the span of 30 seconds. On the frontier world of New Seoul, Colonel Song Yi stood on the bridge of the evacuation ship Freedom's Cost, watching through the reinforced windows as her homeworld died. The fusion charges buried in the planet's core had detonated exactly on schedule, turning the entire world into a miniature sun. The cities where she had grown up, the university where she had studied, the small apartment where she had lived with her husband before the war, all of it was gone in a flash of nuclear fire. The shockwave hit their ship like a giant fist, sending everyone tumbling across the deck. Emergency lights flickered as the vessel's shields strained against the radiation storm. Song Yi pulled herself back to her feet, gripping the railing as she watched 20 billion tons of rock and metal scatter into space like burning confetti. "My children played in those parks," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I met my wife in that cafe on 5th Street. We had our first date at the beach near New Incheon." But even as her heart broke, Song Yi knew they had made the right choice. Better to die free than live as slaves. Better to burn than bow. Captain Omin felt his ship shake as the planet below them tore itself apart. He had been born on that world, had spent 40 years walking its streets and breathing its air. His parents were buried in the cemetery outside, the capital city. His daughter had taken her first steps in the park near their home. All of that was ash now, drifting through space as radioactive dust. Through the observation windows, he watched as the planet's surface cracked like an eggshell. Oceans boiled away in seconds. Mountains that had stood for millions of years crumbled into nothing. The world where 1 billion people had lived and loved and dreamed was becoming an expanding cloud of debris and fire. Omin wiped tears from his eyes as he turned back to his control station. There was no time to mourn. Not yet. His job now was to make sure the evacuation fleet reached safety, carrying with them the seeds of humanity's future. Lieutenant Park Mina worked frantically at her communication station, coordinating the exodus of 200 worlds simultaneously. On her screens, she could see thousands of ships fleeing from dying planets, massive generation ships designed to house entire cities, smaller vessels packed with families, cargo haulers loaded with precious supplies and equipment. Each ship carried something vital for humanity's survival: seeds from Earth's original forests, genetic samples from every species humans had ever encountered, libraries containing all of human knowledge and culture, art and music and literature that represented thousands of years of civilization, medical, supplies and manufacturing equipment and raw materials needed to build new homes among the stars. Evacuation Fleet 7 reports successful departure from New Busan sector, she announced. Fleet 12 is clearing the blast zone around New Tokyo. Fleet 18. Her voice caught for a moment as she realized that Fleet 18 had been her home system. Fleet 18 reports all civilians safely away from New Kyoto. The reports kept coming in, each one representing millions of lives saved and entire worlds lost. Park Mina had never imagined that victory could feel so much like defeat. Admiral Kim Dae stood in the command center of his flagship, watching the tactical display as 200 points of light flared and died across human space. Each light had been a world where humans lived and worked and raised their children. Beautiful worlds with blue oceans and green continents. Industrial. Centers that produced everything from starships to children's toys. Agricultural planets that fed billions of people, all gone now, all reduced to clouds of radioactive ash drifting through the void. "Status report," he requested, his voice somehow steady despite the magnitude of what they had done. "All colonies." "Confirm scorching complete, sir," his aide reported. 200 worlds burning. Evacuation fleets report minimal casualties during departure. The Empire has inherited nothing but ash and radiation. Kim Dae nodded slowly. They had gambled everything on this moment. The idea that freedom was worth any price, even the price of everything they had ever built. History would judge whether they had been heroes or madmen, but that was a question for future generations to answer. Across the void, Overlord Thexmat stared in absolute shock at his sensor displays. Where there had been thriving human worlds just minutes before, now there were only expanding clouds of debris and radiation. In 300 years of conquest, he had never seen anything like it. Species fought back, yes, they died bravely, certainly, but they never destroyed themselves rather than submit. His roar of rage echoed through the command deck as he realized that the humans had robbed him of the greatest prize the Empire had ever sought, 200 worlds that should have been tribute-paying. Colonies were now nothing but funeral pyres, lighting up the darkness of space. For the first time in his long career, Thexmat had encountered a species that would rather burn than bow. And that realization filled him with something he had never felt before: fear. 6 months had passed since the day humanity burned their own worlds, and the galaxy had never seen anything like what followed. Overlord Thexmat had turned the hunt for surviving humans into his personal mission, deploying thousands of ships across every corner of known space. Sleep became a luxury he couldn't afford. Food tasted like ash in his mouth. Every waking moment was consumed by thoughts of finding and destroying every last human in existence. The Vorthan Empire had mobilized resources on a scale not seen since their greatest conquests. Hunter fleets prowled through nebulae and asteroid fields. Sensor stations were built on barren moons to scan for human energy signatures. Rewards were offered to any species that provided information about human survivors. The message was clear: humanity would be wiped from existence no matter the cost, but the humans had vanished like smoke in the wind. Commander Lee Jun pressed himself against the pilot seat of his modified stealth ship, trying to stay calm as they drifted through the Kepler Nebula. The swirling clouds of gas and radiation around them glowed in brilliant shades of purple and gold, beautiful and deadly at the same time. Those same radiation fields that could kill an unprotected human in minutes were now their salvation, masking the heat signatures of 300 ships hiding in the cosmic storm. Behind him, 300 civilian vessels followed in complete radio silence. Families who had lost everything, children who would never see the worlds where they were born, elderly people who spent their days staring at photos of homes that no longer existed. They had been running for months, sleeping in shifts, rationing, food and water, always moving from one hiding place to the next. "Contact bearing 27 Mark IV, whispered Ensign Han Sol from the sensor station, her voice barely audible even in the quiet of the bridge. "Vothan destroyer moving to intercept." Li Jun felt his heart skip a beat, but his hands remained steady on the controls. 6 months of constant fear had taught him to function even when terror threatened to overwhelm him. He adjusted their course slightly, using the nebula's natural currents to drift deeper into the radiation storm. The Vothan ship would have to follow them into the deadliest part of the nebula if they wanted to catch them, and their sensors would be nearly blind in there. "All ships maintain silence," he transmitted on the emergency frequency. "Drift protocol." In effect, throughout the convoy, engines shut down and life support systems switched to minimum power. 300 ships became 300 pieces of floating debris, invisible against the cosmic background. It was a trick they had learned from necessity, turning their greatest weakness into their greatest strength. Captain O'Min floated in the shadow of a massive asteroid, watching Vothan patrol ships pass less than a kilometer away. His vessel had been completely transformed over the past months. The sleek lines of a human cruiser were gone, replaced by an ugly collection of salvaged parts and improvised systems. Solar collectors spread like wings from the hull, gathering energy from distant stars. The outer plating had been redesigned to scatter sensor beams instead of reflecting them cleanly. They weren't the same desperate refugees who had fled burning worlds 6 months ago. Hunger and fear had forged them into something harder, something more dangerous. Every human who survived those first terrible weeks had learned lessons that no military academy could teach. O'Min smiled grimly as he watched the Vothan ships complete their patrol sweep and move on. His crew had spent the morning planting sensor drones throughout the asteroid field, devices that would monitor Imperial movements and transmit the data to other human cells. The hunters thought they were chasing scattered prey, but they didn't understand what humanity had become. Colonel Song Yi sat in the command center of her hidden base, carved deep into the heart of a rogue planet that drifted through empty space. Between star systems, no sun warmed this world, no atmosphere protected its surface. It was a dead rock floating in the void, the kind of place no sane species would ever think to look for survivors. But humans had learned to live in impossible places. The base itself was a marvel of desperate engineering. Geothermal taps drew energy from the planet's molten core. Hydroponic gardens grew food in chambers lit by artificial suns. Workshops turned salvaged metal into weapons and tools. Most importantly, a massive communication array hidden beneath the surface monitored Vothan transmissions across 3 sectors of space. "Imperial Fleet Command is frustrated," Song Yi reported to Admiral Kim Dae during their daily briefing. The old admiral's face appeared on her screen, transmitted through quantum channels that the Vothans couldn't detect or intercept. They found 17 human settlements in the past month, but every single one was abandoned and booby-trapped. Kim Dae nodded slowly. The past 6 months had aged him visibly, but his eyes still burned with determination. "What kind of casualties are they reporting?" 3 ships lost to hidden mines last week. A supply depot was sabotaged near the Rigel system. They're still counting the damage. And someone hacked their communication network again and broadcast our message to half the galaxy. That message had become humanity's calling card, a simple statement that played on Imperial frequencies whenever their security was breached. "We are still here. We are still free. We remember our burning worlds." Song Yi pulled up a tactical display showing Vothan fleet movements across their sector. Red dots marked enemy positions, while blue indicators showed suspected human activities. The pattern was clear to anyone who knew how to read it. The Empire was chasing ghosts, responding to threats that melted away before they could be engaged. "They think they're hunting prey," she transmitted to the Admiral. "They don't realize we've become predators." It was true. The humans who had survived the Great Scorching were no longer the same species that had built cities on garden worlds and worried about stock markets and sports scores. 6 months of living in the void had changed them in fundamental ways. They had learned to see in the dark between stars, to find resources where none existed, to strike from shadows and disappear before retaliation could come. Children who had never known planetary gravity moved through zero-G environments like they were born there. Engineers created impossible machines from scrapped parts and desperate need. Soldiers fought battles in conditions that would have killed their ancestors. Humanity was adapting to life among the stars in ways that surprised even themselves. In the void between star systems, in the hearts of nebulae, in the shadows of dead worlds, humanity had found its new home. They no longer needed planets to survive. They had become something else entirely, a species that could thrive anywhere, fight from everywhere, and vanish into the darkness whenever the need arose. The Vorthan Empire had wanted to conquer humanity. Instead, they had created something far more dangerous, a people with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The hunt would continue, but with each passing day it became less clear who was really hunting whom. The Vorthan Empire had ruled over 1,000 worlds for 3 centuries, but they had never faced an enemy like this. Their vast fleets controlled the major shipping lanes, their governors ruled from marble palaces, and their tax collectors gathered tribute from dozens of species. But none of that mattered when their enemies could strike anywhere and disappear like ghosts. Lieutenant Park Mina crouched in the ventilation shaft above the fuel depot, watching Vorthan workers load energy cells onto transport ships. She had been here for 3 days, studying their routines, mapping their security systems, waiting for the perfect moment. Her team of 6 humans was hidden throughout the facility, each carrying devices that would turn this vital supply station into a fireball visible from orbit. The plan was simple: plant the charges, set the timer, and vanish before anyone knew. They had been there. But simple didn't mean easy. One mistake, one moment of bad luck, and they would all die in Vorthan interrogation chambers. Parkmina checked her chronometer and gave the silent hand signal. Throughout the depot, her team moved like shadows, placing explosive charges near fuel lines and power generators. These weren't the crude bombs of desperate rebels. Human engineers had spent months perfecting these devices, creating weapons that would cause maximum damage while leaving minimal evidence. 15 minutes later, they were back in their stolen shuttle, accelerating away from the depot at maximum burn. Behind them, the facility erupted in a chain of explosions that consumed 3 months' worth of fuel supplies and killed dozens of Vorthan technicians. By the time reinforcements arrived, the humans were gone without a trace. Humans are like smoke. Fleet Commander Zulpex complained to Overlord Thexmat during their daily briefing. We grasp at them and find nothing. They strike our facilities and vanish. They attack our convoys and disappear. How do we fight an enemy we cannot catch? Thexmat stared at the tactical display, showing the latest attacks across 3 sectors. Fuel depots burning, communication relays destroyed, supply convoys crippled and abandoned. Each red mark on the map represented another failure, another moment when his forces had arrived too late to catch the human raiders. Double the patrols, he ordered. Triple them if necessary. I want every sector covered, every possible hiding place searched. These primitives cannot hide forever. But even as he gave the orders, Thexmat knew they were fighting shadows, the me. Humans had learned to use the galaxy's vastness against them, striking from the empty spaces between stars and melting away before retaliation could come. Captain O-Min watched through his ship's periscope as the Vorthan convoy approached their ambush point. 3 cargo haulers protected by 2 escort destroyers carrying supplies to the occupied worlds of the Centauri system. Standard formation, predictable route, perfect target for what his people had learned to do best. His raider squadron consisted of 5 ships that barely resembled their original human designs. Stealth plating made them nearly invisible to sensors. Modified engines could accelerate to attack speed in seconds or shut down completely to drift like space debris. Weapons had been stripped from destroyed Vorthan vessels and integrated with human targeting systems. All units, execute. O-Min transmitted on the tactical frequency. The human ships erupted from the shadow of an asteroid field, like hunting wolves. Plasma cannons and missile tubes opened fire in perfect coordination, crippling the escort destroyers before they could respond. The cargo ships tried to run, but modified human fighters swarmed over them. disabling their engines and stripping their cargo holds of anything useful. 8 minutes after the attack began, it was over. The Vorthans never saw them coming. Never. Got a clear sensor reading. Never had a chance to call for help. By the time the distress beacon activated, the human raiders were already disappearing back into the void, leaving only wreckage and radiation behind. Admiral Kim Day stood in the command center of his flagship, studying tactical reports from across human space. The vessel itself had once been a generation ship designed to carry colonists to new worlds. Now it served as humanity's mobile capital, home to the government in exile, and the military command that coordinated their scattered forces. The year in darkness had changed them all. Kim Day could see it in the faces of his officers, in the way they moved and spoke and thought. They had become something new, something that no species in the galaxy had ever seen before. Not bound to worlds or systems, but children of the void itself. Raid 17. Reports successful completion, his aide announced. Vorthan supply depot at Kepler Station destroyed. No casualties among our forces. Infiltration Team 5 has completed their mission at the communication hub near Rigel, another officer reported. Network virus uploaded successfully. Estimated disruption time, 72 hours minimum. Kim Day nodded as the reports continued. Each success was small by itself, but together they were bleeding the Empire dry. The Vorthans had to defend everything while humans could strike anywhere. It was a war of mathematics, and the numbers were finally starting to favor humanity. Commander Lee Jun moved through the Vorthan communication hub like a ghost, his stolen uniform and forged credentials allowing him to walk past security guards, who never gave him a second glance. The virus in his pocket was a masterpiece of human ingenuity, a program that would spread through the Empire's network like a disease, corrupting navigation data and weapons systems across dozens of worlds. Found the main server room and plugged in the datapad, watching as lines of code began uploading into the Vortan network. Within hours, Imperial ships would find their navigation systems reporting false coordinates. Weapons would misfire during critical moments. Communication delays would turn coordinated operations into chaos. "Upload complete," he whispered into his hidden microphone. "Extraction point in 20 minutes. Lee Jun walked back through the facility at a casual pace, just another technician finishing his shift. By the time the Vortans discovered what had happened, he would be on a ship heading for the Outer Rim, carrying intelligence about their next target. Colonel Song Yi smiled as she read the latest reports from her agents across the galaxy. The Idor's picture they painted was exactly what she had hoped to see. An empire stretching itself too thin, trying to hunt humans while maintaining control over dozens of rebellious worlds. "Status report on Imperial resources?" she asked her intelligence. "Chief, their fleet deployments have increased by 40% in the past 6 months, came the reply. They're pulling ships from garrison duty to join the hunt for us. Several occupied worlds are reporting reduced Vorthan presence. And how are those worlds responding? The Zilani have started organizing resistance cells. The Kethvar are refusing to pay tribute. 3 species in the Outer Rim have stopped responding to Imperial communications entirely." Song Yi transmitted her report to Admiral Kim Day, knowing he would understand the implications immediately. The Empire's obsession with hunting humans was creating opportunities everywhere. Species that had been crushed under Vorthan rule for centuries were beginning to whisper about rebellion, inspired by humanity's example. "We've become what we needed to be," she reported during their evening briefing. "No longer bound to worlds, but children of the stars themselves. And our example is spreading." Kim Day appeared on her screen, older and more tired than ever, but with eyes that still burned with determination. "The Ghost War is working," he said quietly. "They're chasing shadows while their empire crumbles around them. But we need to be ready for what comes next." Song Yi knew what he meant. The Vorthans would eventually realize that hunting humans was bleeding them dry. When that happened, they would face a choice: give up the hunt and let humanity survive, or commit everything to one final desperate attempt at extermination. Either way, the galaxy would never be the same. 1 year had passed since the day humanity burned their own worlds, and the galaxy was on fire. not with the nuclear flames that had consumed 200 human planets, but with something far more dangerous, the fire of rebellion. Across the Vorthan Empire, species that had bowed their heads in submission for centuries were finally lifting them in defiance. The Zilani were the first to openly revolt, declaring independence from imperial rule and destroying the tribute ships, sent to collect their yearly payments. The Kethvar followed within days, their warrior clans rising from hiding to attack Vorthan garrison forces. Soon rebellions were spreading like wildfire across dozens of worlds, each one inspired by humanity's impossible sacrifice. Admiral Kim Day stood on the bridge of New Earth, watching as scattered human fleets converged around the massive generation ship. The vessel had grown over the past year, expanded with salvaged materials and desperate engineering, until it resembled a floating city more than a traditional warship. It was home to 3 million humans now, survivors who had learned to live among the stars, children who had been born in the void, elderly people who had watched their birth worlds burn. Through the observation windows, Kim Day could see the other ships of the fleet taking formation, hundreds of vessels that had been transformed by necessity and desperation into something the galaxy had never seen before. They weren't trying to look like traditional warships anymore. They had become something entirely new, weapons designed for void warfare, built by people who called the darkness between stars their home. Admiral, his communications officer, reported, "We're receiving confirmation signals from all fleet commanders. Operation Reckoning is ready to proceed." Kim Day nodded slowly. For a year they had been ghosts haunting the Empire's supply lines. Now it was time to become something more. Time to show the galaxy what humanity had become in their year of exile. Captain O'Min floated in the command chair of his flagship, surrounded by displays showing the positions of his ghost squadron. The ships around him bore no resemblance to the sleek cruisers that had once patrolled human space. They had been rebuilt from the inside out, modified with technology scavenged from a dozen different species and improved by human ingenuity. His crews had been born in space, raised in the darkness between stars, trained to fight in conditions that would kill most species. Children who had never felt planetary gravity moved through the ship's corridors like they were swimming through water. Engineers who had learned to build impossible machines from scrapped parts kept the vessels, running on systems that shouldn't have worked, but somehow did. "All ships report ready for hyperspace jump," his tactical officer announced. The young woman had been 15 when her world burned. Now she was 21 and had spent her entire adult life preparing for this moment. "Execute jump on my mark," O'Min ordered. "Let's go remind the Empire what they created when they made us homeless." Colonel Park Mina coordinated the massive assault from her position aboard the command ship Freedom's Price. She had been promoted twice in the past year, not because of politics or favoritism, but because humanity needed every capable leader they could find. The scared lieutenant who had fled burning worlds had become a hardened strategist who could plan operations across multiple star systems. Her screens showed the positions of human fleets throughout the galaxy, not just the main battle groups, but the smaller units that had been infiltrating Imperial space for months. Sabotage teams hiding in asteroid fields, reconnaissance ships monitoring enemy communications, strike forces positioned to hit critical targets at precisely the right moment. "Phase 1 is complete," she reported to Admiral Kim Day. "All infiltration units are in position. Phase 2 can begin on your order." Humanity had learned patience during their year of exile. They had grown, strong in the darkness, forged by loss into something harder and more dangerous than they had ever been before. Now they would strike with precision, born of desperation and refined by necessity. Commander Lee Jun led the first wave as human fleets emerged from hyperspace around the Vorthan homeworld. The sight that greeted them was everything they had, hoped for and more. The Empire's greatest planet, seat of power for 3 centuries of conquest, protected by the most powerful defense fleet in the galaxy. But the humans hadn't come to conquer. They had come to deliver a message. "All ships maintain formation," Lee Jun transmitted to his squadron. "Remember, we're not here to destroy their world. We're here to show them what we've become." The human fleet took position just outside the range of the planet's defensive weapons, close enough to be a clear threat, but far enough away to avoid triggering an immediate battle. They weren't hiding anymore. They weren't running. For the first time in a year, humanity was standing in the open, daring the Empire to face them. Admiral Kim Day stepped forward to the main communications array, knowing that his words would be broadcast not just to the Vorthan homeworld, but to every inhabited system in the galaxy. Species across hundreds of worlds would hear what he had to say, and the Empire would never be able to silence the message. I am Admiral Kim Day of Free. Humanity, his voice carried across all frequencies, cutting through Imperial jamming attempts like a sword through silk. We are the species that chose to burn rather than bow. 1 year ago, you came to our worlds demanding surrender. We gave you our answer in flames that lit up the darkness of space. On the Vorthan homeworld, Overlord Thexmat watched from his command center as rebellion reports flooded in from across the Empire. 100 worlds in open revolt, supply lines cut, garrison forces under attack. The humans had done more than survive their year of exile. They had become the spark that ignited the galaxy's desire for freedom. From those ashes, we have become something you cannot defeat, Kim Day continued, his voice steady and certain. A people who know that freedom is worth any price. We are no longer bound to worlds or systems. We have become children of the void itself, and the stars are our domain. The message continued for several minutes, broadcast on every frequency the Empire used. Transmitted by relay stations the humans had secretly established across the galaxy. It wasn't a threat or a demand for surrender. It was something far more dangerous, a declaration that humanity would never kneel again, and an invitation for others to join them in defiance. Colonel Song Yi watched from her hidden base as new reports came in every hour. Human fleets were establishing colonies on worlds beyond the Empire's reach. The rebellion was spreading faster than Imperial forces could respond. Species that had been enslaved for centuries were remembering what it meant to be free. She smiled as she read the latest intelligence reports. The Vorthan Empire was crumbling, not from external conquest but from internal collapse. The cost of hunting humans for a year had stretched their resources too thin. The example of human defiance had inspired too many others to resist. The empire that had ruled the galaxy for 3 centuries was finally breaking apart. Admiral, she transmitted to Kim Day, we're receiving surrender requests from 17 Imperial governors. They're offering to switch sides if we guarantee their safety. And the rebellion, spreading faster than we can track. The Zilani have liberated 4 systems. The Kethvar are moving on the Imperial fleet base at Rigel. 3 species we've never even heard of have declared independence and are asking to join our alliance. Kim Day appeared on her screen, looking older and more tired than ever, but with something new in his eyes. Hope. We paid the ultimate price, he said quietly. We lost everything we had built, but in return we gained something more precious than worlds or cities or the comforts of home. Song Yi nodded, understanding what he meant. They had gained the knowledge that they would never bow again. No matter what the future brought, no matter what enemies they faced, humanity would face them as free people. They had become something new in the galaxy, a species that would rather burn than surrender, and from those ashes had grown stronger than ever before. The Vorthan Empire was ending, not with conquest, but with liberation. And humanity, the species, that had chosen to destroy their own worlds rather than submit, had become the voice of freedom that echoed across the stars.